The wind sliced through the village like a knife. Heavy and pale, the sky hung low over the small town of Saint-Rémy, tucked away in the south of France. It was January 1945, months after the Allied forces had liberated the region. The enemy had retreated, but war still lingered in every silence, every broken wall, every pair of eyes. Claire pulled her threadbare coat tighter around her fragile frame as she crossed the snow-streaked road. Her shoes had holes, her feet were numb, but she walked, always alert, always quiet. At 17, Claire knew the sound of grief by heart. She had heard it in the air the night the bomb fell. Her family home, gone. Her parents, gone. Buried under rubble and fire. The blast had spared her by inches. A neighbor had pulled her from the wreckage. He never let her see what remained of her mother and father. She hadn't asked to. Since then, Claire had been sleeping in the attic of an abandoned school, wrapped in whatever fabric she could find. Her days were a rhythm of survival, searching for scraps, avoiding danger, clinging to fragments of who she used to be. On that grey morning, hunger gnawed at her bones. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. There were rumors that the Americans were handing out rations near the town square. Carefully, cautiously, she approached the makeshift market. Soldiers moved between supply crates and soup pots. Children watched with hollow eyes. Claire stood at the edge, invisible. Then she spotted a box of fruit, unguarded at least for a moment. Her fingers closed around an apple. She ran. Shouts rang out behind her. A soldier followed, boots heavy on stone and slush. Claire turned a corner, heart pounding, and fell hard to her knees in the mud. The apple rolled from her hand. She froze, expecting a blow, but instead a voice called out, hesitant but firm. French, spoken with a thick foreign accent. "She's with me." She had permission. Claire looked up. The man standing before her wore a U.S. Army uniform, his face streaked with dirt, his eyes calm and steady. He didn't shout, he didn't reach for her. He simply offered a hand, open, patient. She hesitated, then took it. He helped her to her feet, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small military ration bar. Gently, he tucked it into her pocket, nodded once, and walked away without another word. Claire stood there in the cold, holding the apple in both hands, her breath misting in the air. She didn't know his name, didn't know why he had helped. But for the first time in weeks, something inside her stirred, faint and fragile, something like hope. That night, Claire returned to the attic with the apple still in her hand. She didn't eat it, not yet. She simply stared at it, round, red, and too whole for a world so broken. The ration bar he had given her remained untouched in her coat pocket like something sacred. She didn't know who the American soldier was, but she had seen something in his eyes. Not pity, something else, a kind of stillness. And in a world full of hunger and noise, stillness was rare. The next morning, she forced herself to eat. Half the apple, slowly, then walked toward well behind the old church where American soldiers had set up a water station. It was cold, quiet, and then there he was. He stood leaning against a wooden fence, speaking with another soldier. Same jacket, same calm presence. His face had that weathered look of someone older than his years. When his eyes met hers, something shifted, a flicker of recognition, followed by the smallest smile. Claire stopped. He approached her slowly, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. A leaflet, written in both English and French, explaining where civilians could receive food and clothing. He handed it to her gently, without a word. Then he pointed to himself and said his name, William. She hesitated, then replied, Claire. He repeated it. His accent softened it in a way she'd never heard. And somehow, it didn't sound like the name of a girl who had lost everything. It sounded like someone beginning again. They stood, in silence, the winter air between them sharp and clean. There were no questions, no promises, just two people surrounded by a broken world. And for the first time, neither of them looked away. William didn't ask for anything. He didn't offer false comfort. He just stayed, and sometimes that was more than enough. Days passed. Not many, but enough for Claire to notice that her eyes were always searching for him, in the market, by the well, near the old bakery where soldiers often gathered. William, the soldier who didn't ask, who didn't stare, who simply existed near her with quiet intention. Sometimes she saw him helping older villagers carry firewood. Sometimes he just sat with other soldiers, sketching in a small notebook. But more and more, he seemed to be where she was. They never arranged to meet. They simply did. One late afternoon, as the light began to fade and snow clung to the rooftops, Claire was walking past a stone wall when she spotted him again. He was sitting on a wooden crate, notebook in hand. When he saw her, he stood up and offered her something, a piece of paper torn and folded, on it words, simple ones. Hello? Thank you. Safe. Friend. And below each, the French translations, some wrong, some funny. Claire laughed for the first time in weeks. She took the paper and corrected a few. Then in the corner, she wrote a word for him. Courage. He didn't ask what it meant. He just looked at her with a quiet smile and tucked the paper into his coat pocket. That night, they sat together by the edge of the fire pit near the American supply tent. Other soldiers were nearby, talking or dozing. Claire held a chipped mug of tea in her gloved hands. William passed her a ration biscuit and pointed at the sky. Star, he said. Then, hesitating, asked, Étoile. She nodded, smiling. They spent an hour like that, naming things, translating, pointing. The world shrank to a circle of light and warmth, and two people learning to speak again, not just through language, but through presence. And as the fire crackled and the wind whispered through the broken houses, Claire felt something unfamiliar, not comfort, not love, but trust. And for someone who had lost everything, trust felt like a kind of beginning. The gunfire returned before dawn. Though the region had been declared free, scattered German resistance still lurked in the hills. Everyone knew it. The silence had always been temporary, the kind that holds its breath before something breaks. Claire had gone to the edge of the square that morning, carrying a small cloth bundle of bread she had managed to trade. She expected to find William waiting near the fountain as he sometimes did, but he wasn't there. There was no sign of him by the crates or the fire pit or the chapel steps. She asked a soldier nearby, stumbling through broken English. He looked at her, then shrugged. Patrol, north of the village, ambushed maybe. The world narrowed, her vision blurred. She turned without a word and walked quickly, not to search, not to cry, just to move, to escape the feeling curling in her chest. For the next 2 days, the world collapsed into fog. Claire avoided the markets. She didn't speak. The attic became her shell again. She kept the folded paper with William's translations pressed under her pillow. Every time she touched it, her throat tightened. She had just started to believe she might not lose again. But now, she had no way of knowing. No news came. No voice said his name. The silence was unbearable. It was on the third morning, grey, windless, that she returned to the well behind the church. She didn't expect anything. Her hands were raw from cold. Her stomach was tight from hunger. And then she saw him walking slowly, leaning on a cane, with his arm in a sling and a bruise along his jaw. William crossed the clearing. Claire froze. He stopped too. For a second, both were still. Then his lips parted in a slow, tired smile, the kind that carries too much pain to be wide, but just enough relief to be real. Claire stepped forward, unsure whether to run, to cry, or to collapse. She did none of those things. She just reached out. William pulled a piece of paper from his coat pocket, the same sketchbook page from before. Now, it showed a more finished drawing. A girl with wind-blown hair sitting beside a well. looking up toward the sky. He handed it to her without speaking. She took it, blinking hard, and in that silence, thick with things neither of them could say, something was rebuilt. Not the world, not the village, but the part of her that still dared to believe in return. The wind had changed. It carried less smoke now, but more uncertainty, the kind that settles in your chest when something is ending and something else is just beginning. William arrived at the schoolhouse late that afternoon, his coat collar up, his steps uneven. Claire was sitting on the stairs, mending a tear in her skirt. She looked up before he spoke and saw it in his face. Something was wrong. He told her simply his orders had come. He would be returning to the United States. In less than a week, a transport ship was scheduled to leave from the coast, and he was expected on it. His injuries had deemed him unfit for continued service in Europe. It wasn't his decision. And then, more quietly, he said the thing that made her breath catch. He wanted her to come with him, not as a refugee, not as someone he pitied, but as someone he couldn't leave behind. He had a friend, someone high enough to help. It wouldn't be legal, not exactly, but it could be done. She wouldn't be listed. She'd board quietly with borrowed clothes and a forged name. There would be no second chance. Claire listened without speaking. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept them folded in her lap. America felt like another world, a place too far. For someone like her, he gave her a handkerchief, white, clean, and told her, "If you decide to come, wear this on your wrist. I'll wait until the last possible moment." Then he left. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark attic. The candle burned low, the wind whispering through broken beams. In her hand, the white handkerchief. Her mind raced. Could she leave? Should she? Was it even real? What if he changed his mind? What if she arrived and there was no place for her in his world? But staying meant silence, ruins, memories that never softened. The next day, everything unraveled. While fetching water from the well, she was stopped by an American officer she hadn't seen before. His tone was sharp. Civilians weren't permitted near the inner perimeter of the base, he said, especially not girls, especially not her. He threatened to have her removed. Later, she learned he had filed a report, one that might affect William's standing, one that could ruin everything. William was furious. He confronted the officer, argued in low, clipped English Claire couldn't understand, but she saw the expression on his face, and she knew what it cost him to raise his voice. When he returned to her that evening, his jaw was tight. He said, "Only one thing. If you come, you have to be there. No one else can decide this for you." Then he turned and walked away. That night, Claire packed in silence. There wasn't much. A worn coat, a folded drawing, a name she still wasn't sure she'd carry into tomorrow. And when the sky began to pale, she tied the white handkerchief around her wrist. Then she stepped into the cold and walked alone toward the edge of the village, where soldiers waited, where her choice would become real, where the road to another life began. The road to the military base was rough, carved through a landscape still bearing the scars of war. The truck jolted over frozen mud, passing broken fences, gutted houses, and fields dotted with forgotten debris. Claire sat quietly in the back, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her coat, the white handkerchief tied tightly around her wrist. She didn't speak. William sat beside her, just as silent. He stared straight ahead, jaw set, shoulders rigid beneath his coat. No one said this would be easy, but now every bump in the road felt like a test. When they arrived, the base was a hive of movement, crates being loaded, officers barking orders, engines rumbling like distant thunder. The ship, tall, grey and imposing, loomed over the harbor, ready to swallow hundreds of soldiers and set course for another world. William helped Claire down from the truck. His touch was brief but steady. He didn't look at her, not directly. Instead, he moved quickly, like a man who couldn't afford hesitation. He spoke to a soldier near the gate, pointed at a list, then at Claire. The soldier hesitated. William didn't blink. A few minutes later, Claire was seated on a crate behind a row of canvas tents, out of view. William had told her to wait there until the last boarding call. She kept her head low, her coat wrapped tight, and tried not to breathe too loudly. That's when she saw him, the officer from the village, the one who had threatened her. He was here, clipboard in hand, walking with purpose. And he looked in her direction, her stomach clenched. William saw him too. He intercepted the man, said something sharp and fast. Claire couldn't hear, but she saw their eyes. It was not a friendly conversation. William stood his ground, his body like stone. The officer glanced at Claire one last time and moved on. The final call for boarding rang out like a crack in the air. William returned for her. He didn't ask if she was ready. He simply nodded, and she rose. Together they approached the gangplank. Soldiers filed past them in rows, helmets strapped, eyes hollow. Claire clutched the edge of her coat. Her feet felt heavy, her heartbeat uneven. At the checkpoint, a young soldier with a clipboard looked up, his brow furrowed. William stepped forward, produced a paper, not official, but convincing, and spoke in a low, authoritative voice. There was a pause. Too long. Then the soldier nodded. They were waved through. Claire stepped onto the ramp. The wooden boards echoed under her boots. Wind snapped at her coat. Behind them, the base shrank. The coast of France blurred. She didn't look back. As the ship pulled away, Claire stood at the railing with William beside her. The ocean stretched into a future she couldn't imagine. But when she looked down at her wrist, at the white handkerchief still tied there, she felt something strange, not fear, but gravity. The weight of a choice made with full heart, full knowledge. She hadn't run. She had stepped forward, and now there was no turning back. The sea was endless. From the deck of the ship, Claire could see nothing but grey water stretching in every direction. The sky above matched it, overcast, cold, without horizon. Days blended together. Time didn't move forward so much as it drifted. She had never seen the ocean before. She had never felt this kind of quiet, the kind that came not from safety, but from distance, from being too far to go back, and still too far to arrive. William spent most of the journey nearby, though not always speaking. He would sit with her on the lower deck, share his blanket when the wind cut too deep. Sometimes he read, sometimes he drew. Once he brought her a small tin of chocolate, saved from a ration pack. She only took a bite. The sweetness tasted too much like memory. At night, Claire couldn't sleep. The ship creaked and moaned. The waves slapped against steel, and every sound pulled her back to the attic, to the bomb, to the scream she never got to finish when the house collapsed. She curled beneath her blanket, fists clenched, heart racing. She never told William, but he knew. One night, unable to bear the inside any longer, Claire climbed to the top deck. It was late. The moon was hiding, the sea ink black. She sat on the metal floor, her knees pulled to her chest, her face to the wind. A few minutes passed before William appeared. He didn't speak, just sat beside her, close enough to offer warmth, but not too close to crowd her. And in the dark, she spoke. She told him about the night the bomb fell, about waking up in rubble, about not seeing her parents again, about the shame of surviving when they hadn't. He listened, not with pity, but with presence. Then he told her about his mother. She had died when he was a boy, an illness, not the war. His father, though rich and respected, never knew how to fill that silence, so William had grown up in a house full of rooms and no warmth. He joined the army not to serve, but to escape. Claire looked at him then, truly looked. 2. People, two kinds of grief, two different wars, and somehow the same ache. They sat in silence, letting the wind carry what their words couldn't. On the fifth day at sea, the first gulls appeared in the sky, and by morning, the shape of land could be seen, faint, distant, rising out of mist like something imagined. Claire didn't cry, but as the coast of America drew near, she pressed a hand to her chest, where she had folded the last drawing William made, a girl beneath a sky of stars, eyes wide open, ready. The port was quiet at sunrise. Claire stepped off the ship and into a world she had never imagined. The harbor buzzed with distant activity, but her mind filtered the noise. Her eyes took in the strange shape of buildings, the wider streets, the language that filled the air like music she didn't yet understand. William walked beside her, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and the kind of stillness she had come to recognize. He didn't rush her. He didn't speak unless she asked. But there was something steady in his steps, a certainty she borrowed from silently. They boarded a train, then another. The journey blurred. It wasn't until they arrived in Boston that Claire felt something shift. The car moved slowly through a long private drive, flanked by bare trees and cold morning light. At the end of the road stood a house. No, a manor, tall and dignified, its stone walls covered in dormant ivy, its windows glowing faintly in the dawn. Claire stopped walking. William turned to her and gently said, "This is home." She didn't move at first. She wasn't sure if her feet could. This place, it didn't look like anything she'd ever known. It didn't look like war, or loss, or silence. It looked like a life that had gone on while the world burned. He walked beside her step by step until they reached the door. Inside, the house was quiet. Carpeted halls, old portraits, the faint scent of aged wood and something sweet. A man in a dark suit nodded respectfully at her. A maid offered her tea in broken French. William guided her through each room with care. No explanations, no grandeur, just space, light, books, rooms waiting to be filled again, and finally a small door. He opened it to reveal a sunlit space with wide windows and a table covered in sketch paper and pencils, the kind of room meant for creating. "For when you're ready," he said. Claire stood there, her hands still, her heart loud. She had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time since the war began, she no longer felt like she was surviving. She felt like she might actually begin to live. This is not a story about being rescued. It's a story about crossing borders, not just between countries, but between fear and choice. Claire didn't find safety in another country. She found it in someone who saw her, stayed, and never asked her to be anything but herself. And sometimes that's where healing begins. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Your words matter. Share this video with someone who still believes in quiet, powerful love. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience, hope, and human connection. Come back soon. Because here, stories are not just told, they're felt.